So first, the presentation's going to follow this, but I wanted to do a quick ode to Brno. So about 15, 16 years ago, actually, I'll start with this. So where do I live? I've lived most of my life in the state of Massachusetts in the United States, and I've moved all the way up here. So I've moved a long way away from where I was originally. So those are the two places I've lived most of my life, and the third place I've lived, came in third place, is Brno. So I don't think I've ever been in a place as often as I've been in Brno anywhere else in the world other than those two states. So it's kind of interesting because before probably I joined Red Hat, I had never heard of the city of Brno. So when I first came here, man, I was walking around the hallways and I saw a picture of myself on the wall. There's no United States facility that has my picture on the wall, so that's kind of cool. So if I was to come back next year and you hung this picture on the wall, then I could take a third and we'd slowly get into infinity. Yeah. So this is the first guy I ever met in Brno. He's Radek, and when I was first coming over here, Radek told me don't speak to anybody over 40 years old because they don't speak English, because they were all brought up in Russian schools. And now they're probably all 70 or something, like that. But anyway, so when I was not a big fan of Czech food, but I'm not a big fan of Indian food. So 15 years ago, I came to Brno for the first time. I met Radek. I came for a couple of weeks. I don't know if it was 2 weeks or 3 weeks. It was a long time. And there was absolutely no food. I couldn't find any food to eat anywhere. And no food that I liked, and until I came upon. Okay? And so over the years, when I'm coming back, the restaurant scene in Brno has improved unbelievably. Okay, I was walking around this weekend downtown, and I found this, and I found this. So it's been a huge upgrade. So anyways, that's my ode to Brno. So now we're going to talk about what I call my Red Hat Obituary. And Radek explained to me that most Czech people have no idea what obituary means. And it's necrolog. Did I pronounce it right? All right, so basically it's usually done after you're dead, but I'm not dead yet. I'm just mostly dead, okay? So basically I'm getting ready to retire sometime, starting next month I'll be working just a couple days a week, and then probably in the late fall, somewhere around October 17th. And if you know from Red Hat, you know what the date means, when you want to be retained. So this is basically a little history of my career. And there's a podcast, Mike Rowe in the United States does a podcast, The Way I Heard It. And what that really means is, it's how I remember it. Some of the stuff, some of the dates might be wrong, things like that, or some of them might be enhanced or whatever. So it's the way I remember it. So I went to the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. This is a picture of my freshman year. And as you can see, they hadn't invented color photography at that time. There's a close-up of me when I had a full head of hair, and I was wearing, those socks were very stylish in the 70s. So that's around 1978, 79 timeframe. I got a BA in mathematics because computer science barely existed at the time. My first programming course I ever took was done on punch cards. So as a freshman in college, we actually had to write Fortran on punch cards. It's been a long career. The following year, they evolved to these digital printers. And these we would actually program. And basically, in my sophomore year, they put a bunch of these in. And the game Adventure, does anybody remember the game Adventure? So Adventure was a command line tool game that you would just type in lines, and then the computer would come back and go up, and it's come back and say, you are now in a twisty little passage. So everybody in the campus was playing that game and using reams and reams of paper because this thing would just keep on going. So junior and senior year, they brought in digital equipment, VT100s. And so that was like this huge advance in technology. But that's what we used at that point. And this sort of shows where eventually I ended up working. So in 1982, I was about to graduate from college. And I went on a job interview with the National Security Agency and the NSA in the US. And they told me at the time, this was the first time I was ever on an airplane. I flew down to the NSA, and they told me to take a limo to where I was going to be interviewed. I, as a stupid 21-year-old at the time, didn't know what a limo was, so other than a stretch limo. So I hopped in a big, huge stretch limo. And so I did the interview in April for a job after graduation. May I graduated. I worked at McDonald's all summer at the beach. My father didn't talk to me for the entire summer. And then the NSA turned me down for the job. So basically, I was jobless at the time, and I got a job that fall at a place called Westwood Family Dental Center. This is not their logo, but it's all I could find online. So these were family dentistries inside of malls. For those young ones, and there used to be these places that you put stores all together inside of a building. Those were called malls. And I was using televideo computers. And for anybody who's ever seen the movie War Games, Matthew Broderick was sitting, his terminal was actually a televideo. All the terminals were televideo. And I met my wife, who was a dental hygienist at the time. So that was the end of that. I was actually working on COBOL, so I was one of the people responsible for your Y2K. And I was working on an operating system called CP/M. This predates MS-DOS. So Bill Gates was, I think he might be a few years older than me, but he was still, MS-DOS had not been released yet, but we were working on this. It was a multi-system, basically terminal system for doing billing and stuff like that at dentistries. In 1984, I got hired by Digital Equipment Corporation. At that time, Digital Equipment Corporation was the second largest computer company in the world. There was about 135,000 employees. Probably most of the people in this room had never even heard of it now, but it was basically the big competitor against IBM. So in 1985, I got married, and I meet this guy. And I got a job with Paul Cormier. For those that aren't Red Hat, Paul Cormier is Red Hat famous. He was CEO up till a couple of years ago. He's on the board of directors still now, and was very famous. This is also the last time I ever prepared a CV or a resume, depending on how you call it. So I had to prepare it for him, and I've never done one since. And he says I'm quite a bit younger at this point in this photo. So we worked on a project called DecAthena. Anybody here ever hear of DecAthena? How about MIT Athena? There's a couple old guys in the back. So DecAthena or MIT Athena was a goal of making distributed computing on campus. Basically, it was campus computing. They really wanted to be a networked operating system. And one of the big things you have heard of that came out of it was the Kerberos project. So I started working on computer security with Kerberos. Also, X Windows came out of that project. So it's fairly famous. And also, this was my first exposure to Unix. So before that, I was working on VMS. VMS was, the way you would write was they had a sysqio, and it was like 18 parameters in order to write text to the terminal screen. And like the 15th parameter was where you would put your buffer. And then I saw Unix, and it was like write, buffer, or size. And I said, I want to do that. So I switched over to that. Eventually, we became the Internet Business Unit, and Digital Equipment Corporation had a thing called Alta Vista. How many people here have ever heard of Alta Vista? Wow, a lot of people. Alta Vista, we could have been the Google. So, but I didn't work on Alta Vista Search. They were also working on firewall technologies and Alta Vista Tunnel. So I created a product at Tunnel 97, and we could do simultaneously 64 connections to a big honking server to get basically VPNs, but we called them tunnels at the time. Digital Equipment Corporation was deciding to spin this off into a separate company. So this is all during the dot-com boom, so basically mid to late 90s. They moved us to our own building. They were all set. Paul was going to be one of the big executives in it. I don't know if he's going to be the CTO, but he was going to be a big executive in it. And all of a sudden, Digital canceled it. And then Digital got sold to Compaq. And then Paul said, bye-bye. So Paul leaves Digital at that point, leaves me behind, and goes and joins a startup called HackerShield. HackerShield basically was doing security using hackers' tools to attack your private network and then figure out if you had vulnerabilities in it. So Paul called me up and said, hey, Dan, you want to join me at HackerShield? I said, what the hell? HackerShield 1 month later got bought out by a company called BindView. So all these people were celebrating getting rich, and I think I got a free beer out of it. So we went to this company called BindView. Then in 2001, the dot-com bust and Paul announced to me, Dan, I'm leaving for Red Hat. About 6 months later, BindView lays me off, and Paul says, Dan, you want to work for Red Hat? So I got laid off on a Friday, came to work on a Red Hat on a Monday, and boom. I had a lot of fun playing with the slide transitions things. So I joined in August of 2001, and Paul said, work on some security stuff. So that was, my instruction was like, go work on, do something. I was up in my room. I was the first Boston area employee, I think, first new hire to the Boston area. We were all working out of a house. Back then, I was, I think I had a 2400 baud modem or something. But so we were working at home. There was about 400 employees at Red Hat at the time. There were a few other employees in New England area. And I was investigating using open source tools to do VPNs and firewalls, because that's what I knew. I was writing GUIs in Python to some of the sysadmin tools. If you remember way back, there used to be all these GUI tools. And then September 11th happened. So this basically, I started August 3rd, September 11th happens, and I go to my new hire in Raleigh, basically about a week after 9/11. So the interesting thing is another guy named Jeff Needle who works for Red Hat, still works for Red Hat, and he's Jewish. And the two of us were going through customs right after 9/11, and I sailed through as the whitest human being on the planet. And they kept on stopping him, so it was kind of a scary time. So in 2002, the NSA comes to Red Hat, and they offer us a decent amount of money to help them upstream SELinux into the Linux kernel. And Red Hat looked around for someone that had the title security engineer in their title, and my name popped up, and then I got payback at last. They didn't hire me, and I became Mr. SELinux. So I also had, this was my first youngin', a guy named Eric Paris, and he worked on the SELinux kernel. I think he was fresh out of college at the time, and he was what I call my first youngin'. The definition of youngin' is someone that's younger than my youngest son. So there'll be a lot of youngins. So he worked on that kernel. Now he looks far older. He looks like Santa Claus. And he said, no, I'm no longer a youngin', but a DE and a bigwig in OpenShift. So he's done well. So Major Hayden is not here, but a lot of people were having some issues with SELinux. And so Major Hayden put up a fairly famous, Major is now, at this time he wasn't a Red Hat employee, but he now works for Red Hat. And he put up a site called stopdisablingeselinux.com, and that's been a long-running joke on it. In 2005, with the SELinux project, we were working on a thing called MLS, multi-level security. And multi-level security, one of the goals was the same user could log into a system, and if he came in over a top secret network, he would see certain files in his home directory and /temp. If he logged in over a secret network, and you have it on the same machine, if you logged in on a secret network, they had to see different files. He would see you'd see secret files, but he would no longer see the top secret files. So he had to come in and look at different, this is the most technical part of the talk. And what we use for that is basically the mount namespace. So this is probably the first use of the mount namespace in any product, and PAM namespace. And if you look in PAM to this day, there is a, I think it's PAM mount namespace, right? Where's Lucas? Okay. So I call that the first container. Okay? So it used security, isolation, and it used namespaces to control what's going on, and that showed up in RHEL 5. I created a thing in 2006 called the SELinux Sandbox. And the goal of the SELinux Sandbox was to run GUIs like Firefox in different home directories. So what my thinking at the time was I could run an SELinux Firefox and only see the intranet, and another Firefox and only see the internet, and basically have it isolated and start to isolate networks, but basically by sharing /user, but having different home directories and different confinement using SELinux and eventually C groups to control access on this thing. And I called the SELinux Sandbox. Sadly, I did not call it a container because I'd be like super rich at this point. I also created this user called the XGuest user, and this actually came up a few weeks ago. Lucas is in the room somewhere, but there he is. So XGuest was the idea was to create a kiosk system where someone could log in and have his directory disappear when he logs back out. And so for libraries. So one interesting story there, I was trying to do a show, probably for DevConf, and I wanted to go and take pictures of libraries, and I also thought it would work well in in a bank. And I actually walked in with a camera into a bank before I said, this is probably a very bad idea, and I left. So in 2008, we needed a way to isolate multiple VMs. This is about the time that Red Hat was switching from KVM to KVM from Zen. And there was a lot of talk about what happens if someone breaks out of a VM onto the host. And SELinux had this concept of MLS, and I invented this concept of MCS, multi-category security, which was it was basically a cheating on the way MLS worked. And MCS is the way that we isolate all the containers in the world and all the VMs and stuff like that. So that's when I came up with that, and the term we used for that was SVIRT. So SVIRT is the way we've been isolating containers, VMs, and everything else. After years of describing SELinux, I had a great idea. And a good friend of mine, Maureen Duffy, basically she did a lot of graphics arts and a very good artist. And I said to her, I wanted to describe SELinux as a coloring book. And let's do it. And so that was when the SELinux coloring book came along. And Maureen Duffy, also a DE now. And so we created the SELinux coloring book. We eventually created the container coloring. The SELinux coloring book explained security based on cats and dogs eating cat food and dog food. The container coloring book was used the analogy of the three pigs, and basically that the way you would run containers was in an apartment building, standalone houses, apartment building duplexes, and eventually got down to SELinux disabled, which was pigs sleeping in the park. And then the final one we wrote, we were going to do another one, but then COVID happened. But we did the container commandos, and this is where Podman and Builder and Scopio and all of them are described in that coloring book. 2008, Mike McGrath comes to FUDCon and we sit across the table and had a large, he was at the time the head of Fedora infrastructure at a FUDCon, and Mike and I had a heated discussion about SELinux. So Mike said he was not sure it was worth the trouble at that point, to deal with SELinux, but he did like Elvis sideburns at that point. So a couple of years later, the first version of OpenShift happens. Basically, OpenShift was going to be a web service that you could SSH into, get an account on, and help developers create applications for RHEL. But you'd have hundreds or even thousands of users logging onto basically a time server system at the same time. So we needed to all the users had to do is provide an email address, and then they had to develop, and it was developed and managed by Mike McGrath. So Mike comes to me and says, hey, Dan, do you think we could use that SELinux to isolate the users on the system? And So Mike is now Vice President of Core Platforms at Red Hat. He doesn't have sideburns anymore. And I had payback on him. And as you see, he's got a little mouse pad on my thing. About 2012, and I'm making this time up, I don't remember the exact time, it was time to move on from SELinux and to move into other areas, really to concentrate more on containers. And although I was focusing more on container SELinux and basically how we'd isolate containers on the system, and I met a new youngin at that point, and he's in the room, so Lucas Freybeck. Up here. So he was, I think he was 12 years old at the time because he looks like he's about 24 now. And he says, I am now in charge of all things SELinux and other RHEL security tools. So another successful youngin. So in 2012, working on OpenShift v2, RHEL 7 preparation. So this is about 6 months before RHEL 7 came out in 2013. So OpenShift had evolved to using C groups and namespaces. And we were creating this thing, I was creating this thing called Vert Sandbox. So I was leading a team that was creating Vert Sandbox for OpenShift. And what Vert Sandbox was going to be very similar to the SELinux sandbox in that it was going to take user and share that with all the containers, but then each container would have its own var and /etc. And at that point in the Red Hat world, we thought that everybody just cared about having the users, basically the software always up to date, but then you'd want to run multiple containers and take care of containers. And so we were preparing that for a RHEL 7 release, and this is about 9 months before. And this guy shows up. So this guy, Matt Hicks, at that time he was the manager of OpenShift. And he came to me and said, what do you want to do about Docker? And I said, what's Docker? So I had no idea what Docker was, but suddenly we had to change everything. So from September of 2012 till Red Hat Summit, we created the Docker team was formed to solve issues like layering inside of the file system, SELinux isolation for containers. And this guy comes along, his name's Alex Larson. Alex Larson is one of the brightest engineers I've ever worked with. He's a tremendous engineer, and he basically created a mechanism that we could actually run Docker containers on top of RHEL, because Docker was using this out-of-band file system for its layering file system, and Alex created multiple ways of doing it. I also was working with Vivek Goyal, who is a tremendous kernel engineer, and him and I worked heavily on getting the overlay file system to work, especially with SELinux, and there was huge amounts of security discussions on that. So hopefully Alex Larson will be a DE soon. He deserves it, unbelievably so. I'll probably get in trouble for saying that, and I'm hoping this year. He now leads RHIVOS engineer. He was the guy that made RHIVOS happen. And then Vivek sadly went to the dark side, and he sadly has become a manager in the Vert team at this point. So, Vivek and I talk every week. He's one of my best friends at Red Hat. So this guy is Solomon Hykes. So we get around to the 2013 Red Hat Summit. Solomon Hykes at that time really liked me. And we had a little bit of a falling out, perhaps. So at the Red Hat Summit, the biggest announcement, the first announcements was Docker support on top of RHEL. And the Docker people were all here, and everybody was happy. Docker was on the main stage. A couple of years later, I came and gave a talk at DevConf. And I called it Docker versus Systemd. And at that point, I was complaining about being the man in the middle. So, Solomon Hykes, brilliant engineer, created basically the whole container world we now know, and Leonard Pottering, another brilliant engineer who did Systemd, and they didn't get along. They had two very different views of the world, and we were trying to take Docker and make it work in a Systemd type world. We submitted a whole bunch of packages upstream to Docker. And especially around getting Systemd to work with it, and a Docker employee at the first DockerCon, I'll tell you who she is, who they were, basically said, I had on a badge that says, I say no to all Systemd specific PRs. So there was starting to be a little problem between Red Hat and Docker. About 2015, OpenShift and Docker had conflicts. I'm ignoring the time. The OpenShift and Docker had some conflicts. Basically, Docker was releasing and Kubernetes releasing in different streams. And every time Docker would release, Kubernetes would be broken. And so there was always this hostility between the two projects, because Kubernetes, the first versions of Kubernetes were wrapped around Docker. So we wanted to create an alternative container engine to Docker that was dedicated purely to Kubernetes. And so we started the CRIO effort. So CRIO is, Kubernetes defined this thing called the CRI, Container Runtime Interface, and the O stood for OCI containers. So what was the Docker team was evolving into the CRIO team at that point to kick off this project. And we had a couple of other engineers who were on that project. So Runal, Patel, and Antonio Murdaka were both originally working with Docker, and they really took over and running the project. And the guy in the middle there is a guy named Kelsey Hightower, and he's like internet famous. He was a big speaker, huge speaker for Google, had 8 billion followers and everything else. Runel, I always say Ronald, and people get upset with me, is now a DE in the OpenShift team. And Antonio was another young'un who also worked with me on Docker. And Antonio now is working on RHEL for Edge, I believe. I'm not sure. But anyways. So CRIO needed some additional features. So two of the smartest guys I knew inside of Red Hat, I wanted to bring into the team. And there's this guy named Miloslav Termak, who's probably in the crowd somewhere up here. This guy is so incredible, but he really keeps you on your toes. Basically, he's an unbelievably good engineer. So I got him to come over, and we worked on containers image, which led to a tool called Scopio. Well, Scopio predates it a little bit, but basically Miloslav came in and fixed it up. My rule with Miloslav, if he ever approves a PR, you merge it right away, because he's relentless. Ability to store and build container images was also important for the CRIO, because I wanted to be able to build images. And this guy, Nalan Daibai, who's probably my longest friend at Red Hat, we shared cubes for 10 years. He is another brilliant engineer, and he's been leading the builder effort for years. He's the guy that came up with the term builder, if you don't know the joke. He asked me what to name it. I said, I don't care, just call it builder. And that's how the name came about. Okay. So CRIO needs additional tools, and we needed the ability to test the tools. And so we have this Brent Bodie, who is now basically he's the head of Podman for the last several few years. He came on the team, and he helped us build this tool called KPod. So the idea was a Kubernetes pod tool, and really our idea was to test out, pulling images and building images and things like that. So KPod was born. There was also one of our #1 contributors from outside of Red Hat was this guy named Valentin Rothberg. He wanted to join Red Hat, get hired by Red Hat. I told him I didn't want him because I like to have an external contributor. And he said, I will never work on the project unless you hire me. So he forced me to hire him. So we had lots more youngins. And so Matt Heon in the room, who is still one of the chief architects of Podman. Urvashi Monani. Urvashi's interesting. I scared her to death her entire life, and for 2 years I called her Urvashi, and no one, she wouldn't tell me, but now finally I figured it out. We also had Sally O'Malley. I'm not sure she qualified quite as a youngin', but anyway, she was one of my interns, and then Peter Hunt. All of them are great employees for Red Hat. We also had some more interns that went through the Podman team. A lot of them still work on the Podman team. Ashley Kai, Paul Hosinger, Charlie Dern, who now works on AI, and Aditya Rajan. Flowtech, that's his. Anyways, he works on the builder team. Paul is expert on networking, and Ashley's led a lot of the cross-platform development. So these are all youngins that came on board. So we get to 2017, and Docker introduces the Mopi project. So Docker was not happy with me because I was shipping Docker with patches. So we had lots of patches to make systemd work with it well. We also wanted to support alternative container registries. Docker's business model was Docker.io, right? They wanted every container in the world to be, container image to be stored in Docker.io. And we wanted to support, basically allow you to build your own container registry. And we wanted better support for systemd. Docker then went hostile on us. They changed their license and to try to prevent us from using the word Docker. And they changed the upstream project to Moby. And they told Red Hat that we had to use Moby for RHEL 8 or ship Docker without patches. And so game on. So at this point, we basically switched to Podman. And so one of the key issues I had was that the word Docker became an adjective. So everything in the universe was Docker, Docker, Docker. And so we renamed Kpod to Podman. And then RHEL 8, we dropped Docker totally from it, and then we defaulted to Podman. Scott McCarty came on as the program manager, product manager, and actually led it, and Scott is now a bigwig in RHEL. And I gave a fairly famous talk here, and if you've never seen it, you should go on YouTube and find the swear jar talk. Basically, I tried to describe containers without using the word Docker, and every time I did, I threw money. Every time I said Docker, I had to throw a coin into the Docker swear jar, and it became impossible. I've been very happy at this conference. I've only caught like 2 or 3 people using the Docker adjective, so it's a huge improvement. 2021, I wrote a book called Podman in Action. This was promised to my mother after she passed away. I said, I better write that book. And I'd never do it again. So I left the Podman team at that point and moved on to RHIVOS, Red Hat in-vehicle operating system. And basically, I was using containers again. Containers, SELinux, follows on. But I wanted to use containers. I also wanted to get out of the way, because I tend to be a credit sucker. A lot of people think I do everything, and really it's these incredible engineers that worked under me that do the lion's share of the work. So I wanted to get out of the way and let them flourish on their own. So container technology is future success and achieve functional safety. So RHIVOS was all about getting to functional safety, so you can run software as RHEL as an operating system inside of a car. And our old friend Alex Larson was the guy that made that happen. So again, this guy should be a DE. So 2023, I got together with Matt Hicks. This was at the tail end of COVID, and I told him that I'm planning on retiring. And he said, it'd be great if you could come to Boston office and spend time here with young engineers. Well, I live about basically 2-hour train ride away and then a half-hour walk. So I do a 5-hour commute back and forth to the Boston office on a weekly basis. And I said, sure, just what the young engineers want, a dinosaur to eat lunch with them. But anyways, and then he asked me, what do you want to do until you retire? And I said, other than drink beers, Colin Walters has this great idea. Colin, I jumped ahead. What do you want to do? And I said, well, I think Colin has this great idea about bootable container images. And then Matt said, great, we want it by summer in 9 months to be run at the Red Hat Summit. And he called it Moonshot. And I said, yikes. So this was a month later. Anyway, so that was the kickoff of the bootc. So there's a guy named bootc Collins, and he was from the 1970s, a big rock star, and he always wore glasses with stars. And of course, we have our own. We have Colin bootc Walters, so he, again, a brilliant engineer, just became a DE. Colin's idea was design an operating system via container files, build with standard tools like Podman build, add the bootc command to pull down images, allow building of OS image artifacts with the Anaconda support. And Matt, he came and said, it'd be great if this thing could use AI. And Steph can back me up. This actually happened. Yeah, so we had like 6 months, and all of a sudden we changed the project to be bootable containers to bootable containers with AI. But we did it. And you can see in this picture, we all have bootc Collins glasses on, star glasses. So after that, I started to concentrate on AI. So after we got that out the door, I started to concentrate more on AI. Worked on a project called AI Lab Recipes, which is a Podman desktop plugin, helped developers write AI apps. And Sally O'Malley is the chief person who came up with some great ideas of how to use containers and AI models together. And Michael Clifford is a data scientist. He did all the real AI stuff that I still don't understand. But anyways, it's really cool. There was a couple of good demos at the show. So 2 great engineers working on that project. I continue to concentrate on AI. One of the engineers I meet with on a weekly basis, I'm not sure if he qualifies as a youngin or not, but he's close. And it's a guy named Sergio Lopez out of Spain. He's absolutely brilliant. So we needed this stuff to work on Macs. So we needed Mac GPUs inside Podman machines. Sergio, he works on RHIVOS. This isn't his job, but he called me up. We got a Slack, and he said, hey, I did something to make this work. And he created live krun and krun kit, which is now being used by both Podman and Docker for running, basically taking the GPUs and getting it into the VMs inside of the containers. And the guy doesn't even work on it as primary job. So another unbelievable engineer at Red Hat. 24 to 25, we moved on from bootc to AI stuff. And there's another guy I met who was here. Sadly, he's not here now. He had to leave. Named Eric Curden. Eric Curden was, I think he qualifies as a youngin. He had this idea. He was trying to work with, he came from RHIVOS as well. And after trying to contribute to a RamaLama project, he basically was getting stonewalled by them. He wanted to add features that he thought was reasonable. He found them basically hostile to open source. Found out they use Llama CPP projects. So Llama CPP is all the smart stuff that does AI. It really isn't the tools, the wrapping it. And then he built a bunch of bash scripts that basically ran AI locally on his laptop, just using Llama CPP and using bash and curl to pull them down. Showed it to me, and RamaLama was born. And so we ported it all to Python to basically make it, contributable. I don't think we would get many contributors. We now have almost 100 contributors in like 8 months of development. So AI, containers, security, and SELinux. So that's basically where I am in my career, and that's the end of the talk. But I just want to say, people ask me, what's going to be like when Dan Walsh isn't around here. There's so many friggin' great engineers that came to Red Hat. So many inspiring people working with young. But the thing is, we always have to work with young engineers. That's where I wanted to put in, Palpatine from Star Wars and basically sucking the energy out of young engineers. That's what I feel like I've done. It's the life vitality of young engineers. And then when you meet a brilliant engineer, hang on to him. When you meet a Colin Walters, it's like you just figure out what he wants to do and then inspire him, get him to do it. So that's the end of my talk. I don't have any time for questions. I'm sure I'm way over time, but thank you for listening to me.